Brainterviews. Hi, I'm Sheila Henson, an ADHD coach and educator. On this channel, we talk about neurodiversity, how different people have different brains that function very differently in the world, and how we'd all be better off if we could understand each other better. Today, I invited my friend Taylor, who is a self-proclaimed neurotypical person, and we're going to interview her to talk about how her brain works. I personally have ADHD, and I work a lot with ADHD and ADHD autistic clients. So let's take a look at how her neurotypical experience differs from mine and those of my clients. These are Brainterviews. I'm here with my friend Taylor, who is a self-identified neurotypical person. It's like a unicorn or a narwhal. We didn't think they existed. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Taylor worked with me. She's actually one of my staff in my classroom, but now she's a teacher at a school for kids with neurodivergence and trauma. Taylor is amazing at working with these kids and understanding them, treating them like human beings and giving them respect and teaching them how to advocate for themselves. And so it's interesting to me that she's neurotypical because often neurotypical people will have trouble understanding neurodivergent kids, and especially ones that have behavior problems. So I'm really curious to learn more about Taylor's brain. So Taylor, what does it mean to you to be neurotypical?
I think neurotypical means like the way that I experience and process and think about the world, maybe like relatable and understandable to many other people. It would make sense to people if I, explain the experience that they have. They're like, oh yeah, I see it that way. I feel it that way. I can get that. Or in this way that, like, I can fairly easily meet the expectations of our society and get the things done that people expect me to get done in the way that, like, people expect them to be done. Right? I don't want to say, like, the majority of people, because I actually think, like, so many more people probably are neurodivergent than other people realize. But it is, like, in a way that like our society is set up and expected people to think like and be like.
So if you want to get something done, what process do you go through? If you need to, write a report or you need to clean your room, like what is the process that your brain goes through for that?
I used to procrastinate a lot growing up, but I, came to learn that it's going to cause me more anxiety to not do something and put it off while I do the things that I enjoy. So now it's kind of this process of like, okay, I know I need to accomplish this certain thing for whatever reason, and I kind of backtrack so I can see like the whole picture of like what needs to be done and what are the steps involved to get that done and what kind of obstacles might come up in the way and kind of like work backwards from that. So if there's something that needs to be done before something else, then I can prioritize, starting at that step and can fairly well like estimate the amount of time that's going to take to do something so I can schedule it in. Like for example, getting ready to come over here today. So I was like thinking I want to wear this certain outfit so this works well on camera type of thing. I'll set that out the night before and then kind of throughout the morning would check in with the time and like how much time it was going to be before I needed to like get my makeup ready so that it didn't all wear off by the time I came over, but so that I wasn't doing that last minute before I rushed out the door. And in the meantime, like working on Christmas gifts and things like that, bouncing around to different things, but like, yeah, having this idea of like, okay, it's gonna take me 15 minutes to get my makeup on, so I need to do that like, half an hour before I need to go.
And you just did it in that amount of time. Yeah. I'm sure that like with ADHD, or other conditions can have executive dysfunction, but definitely with ADHD, there's a lot of things in there I recognize as would be a struggle, right? So like anticipating how much time things are going to take would be difficult. Getting myself to start doing something. I like that you mentioned that you are seeing the big picture beforehand. That is something that I recommend that my clients or, kids that I work with, that they're going to ask for as an accommodation is an example. Because we struggle with seeing the big picture, we don't know where to start. And that seems to be something that a lot of autistics struggle with as well as ADHDers. And so getting that, like, you just being able to visualize, like, oh, this is what the end result's going to be, and then, like, these are the steps to get there, for us can be really hard. And, like, I know for myself, having an example where as soon as I know what it's supposed to look like, okay, now I can do the steps to get there. But you just do that.
Yeah.
It's like a magic trick. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think, like, there's a lot of cognitive flexibility that comes into that, too. I think, like, especially in school settings, if a teacher's like, okay, we're going to have this project, and they kind of outline it, but they don't give a concrete example, I can kind of like along the way adjust course as needed, or like tell myself, okay, I think they mean this, and then if I get this feedback, then I'll change and like make it more like that. But I know that can be really hard if you have a very concrete idea in your mind that may not match up with what your teacher has said, for example, because they didn't give a clear, you're having to make it up, and then you do exactly what you had in mind, and they're like, no, that's not what I meant at all. Like, being able to have that, like, emotional and cognitive flexibility of, like, okay, that's not a big deal.
Yes.
I'll just adjust some things, and then it'll work.
Yeah, I have a little metaphor, I guess, that I use for that, trying to distinguish, because ADHD and autism can look very similar from the outside, and obviously it's something like 60% of ADHDers have autism as well. So a lot of people with ADHD just don't recognize that they're autistic, or autistics don't recognize that they have ADHD. But a lot of the things can look the same on the outside, but it's a different process inside. And that rigid thinking, flexible thinking, I think is one of the examples of that. And so the little metaphor that I came up with is like, there's a house, and let's say a neurotypical person like just goes in the front door. Mm-hmm. And then an ADHDer shows up and tries to get in the front door and can't get in, and then someone says like, hey, there's a back door, and the ADHDer goes like, oh, okay, and then like goes around to the back door. And then an autistic person goes up and tries to get in the door and can't, and someone goes, hey, there's a back door, and they go, no, but you're supposed to use the front door. Mm-hmm. And so like often like an autistic person might get stuck in the idea of like the correct way to do something, that I need to follow the rules, like that sort of rigidity, versus an ADHDer is just not aware, like they're so like focused into one thing or not focused into something else that they might not see it. But you can just do it. Just adjust as needed.
Yeah, like in that example, like, if I tried to go in the front door, my mind goes into problem solving mode. I'm like, okay, this isn't working, so maybe I'm using the wrong lock. Okay, that's not working. Let me go and see if there's another way that I can go in. Like, when I was thinking about these questions, how does your brain work? A lot of it is that problem solving, like thinking about my day of like, okay, I wanted to have this for dinner. Oh, but I don't have those ingredients. So am I going to stop at the store, or am I going to make something else? And then kind of working through each of those scenarios, just like thinking about that, thinking about the time it'll take to do different things. So having that like access to problem solving pretty easily would be a part of it.
That's great that you use that term, because the term problem solving mode is part of my program for task initiation. Task initiation is one of the executive functions. It's just getting started on a task, which could also mean like getting restarted after a break or whatever. I recognize there's so many ways that we can deal with that, like body doubling or a spoonful of sugaring, or, getting an example. But we can't do any of that if we look at the problem and go, ah, and then like, run away or whatever, which is a lot of the time neurodivergent people, because they weren't taught like, oh, you're going to have to start thinking about this in a different way. Right. Where we're taught, this is the way to do it this way or be punished, we'll give you $100 if you do it this way. And we're like, I still don't know how. Yeah. And so trying to get people to reframe those moments to, instead of avoiding or just becoming overwhelmed and then running away, fight or flight or flee, all that to get into problem solving mode. And for, let's say, an ADHD like myself, that is going to probably require me externalizing those thoughts, because my internal thought processes are so scattered that if I'm trying to plan out my day, or if I'm going to plan out like how to get started on something or how to get in the door, I'm going to get distracted by my own thoughts and then get overwhelmed and then just want to give up. It's going to feel very exhausting. Whereas if I sort of write it down or just explain it to somebody else, just say like, hey Taylor, I just need to let you know, like I'm getting ready, and like first I'm gonna get my hair done, and then I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna set up the cameras, and then blah blah blah. Now I've created a path in my mind that is no longer overwhelming, and then I can follow that path a lot easier. And that's something that for my clients, that doesn't come naturally. That's something that they have to learn how to do. But for you, you're saying that was something that kind of comes more easily to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Earlier on, like when I was younger, procrastinating a lot and kind of like learning not to do that. As a kid, you'd much rather be doing things that are fun and things that you enjoy. And I would, put things off. And then over time, realizing that caused me a lot more anxiety than just doing it to begin with. I think a lot of people, like even neurotypical people, need to learn those skills of like time management, project management, prioritizing, but I didn't have those barriers to learning that. It was like I experienced like having a lot of anxiety trying to get the project done the night before, it not going well, and then from that experience being able to be like, okay, so next time if I break this down into steps, that'll work out better for me. So there aren't those barriers to learning those things where as like if that just doesn't come easily or naturally to you, you're gonna have to learn that in different ways and scaffold the steps a lot differently.
So what made you agree to this interview? Because I put on my TikTok that I wanted to do these interviews and you messaged me saying you would want to do it.
One, you're really fun to hang out with. Also, I have 2 younger siblings who are both neurodivergent in different ways. So I have had that unique experience of kind of being able to like compare and contrast my experience with theirs. And also because of my experience living with them as my siblings, I went into, as you said, this field. I majored in psychology and I work with students who are neurodivergent. And so that's really important to me. And I want to advocate for neurodivergent people in any way that I can. I find like it's really important to like educate and understand one another. I just recently got my master's degree this past spring and thank you. My thesis was in what leads to like holistic success in education for autistic students. So not just like are they able to like graduate and to get a degree, but did they personally experience success as they define it in mind, body, heart, and spirit, and like what leads to that.
I love that. I want to read that.
I'll send it to you. My biggest finding, like the most important thing, was acceptance and a sense of belonging. And until you have that, like learning's not going to happen. Like they're not going to feel successful. So I really want to tell more people about that and help contribute to a more accepting world for everyone, so that if everyone is successful, then it's just going to make it better for everybody else.
That's funny. My master's thesis was on rapport building, reducing anxiety for better learning and better learning experience. So it's like almost very similar, because I mean, what I was learning about anxiety, a lot of that is just neurodivergent people trying to navigate a neurotypical system. Like you were saying, like that sense of belonging. If the teacher takes time to get to know that student, to get to individualize what they need. And I mean, the crazy thing with schools is that we know firsthand, like creating accommodations for the neurodivergent kids makes it easier for the neurotypical kids too. Yeah. Like just because they can succeed in the system more easily doesn't mean they're not helped by having the assignment on the board, having the task on the board, having reminders, putting a little like music on during quiet time so they can, focus and things like that.
Or like everyone needs to learn those task management, time management, prioritizing. So if you're teaching that to everyone as well as like the additional scaffolded steps that might just not become like inherently clear to like the neurotypical students, that they're still going to learn from that as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love what you're saying about like the more that we understand each other, the more we can just communicate better, everything kind of goes better for everybody. And neurodiversity to me is very interesting, not necessarily as a collection of diagnoses, but as just a literal like diversity of minds and like ways of thinking, and how even among, let's say ADHDers, like there's a huge difference, and then you add different comorbidities onto that, and there's just a completely different experience of like what's going on in your brain. One of the things I've been asking people that I get really curious about is, do you think in words, pictures, concepts? Like, what is it like in there?
Yeah. I found that I like really think in like words and verbalizing. I read Temple Grandin's books about like thinking in pictures, and that was like my first introduction to like, okay, people can actually have different experiences of how they like process the world in their minds. So that really kicked me off thinking about it. And yeah, I realized like I don't have many images in my mind at all. There are a couple like amazing artists in my family, and I've never really been one that's like had this compulsion to draw or wanted to draw. But when I do sit down to draw, like I need to be looking at something, and if I can see something, I can like recreate it pretty well, but like I don't have images in my mind to pull from. This just happened at school this past week. I was trying to draw a cow on the board for this vocab lesson we were doing, and they're like, that looks like a deer, that's so weird, what is that thing? And then I pulled up a picture of a cow on my phone and I drew it, and they're like, wow, how did you do that? I'm like, I had to see it. Like, I know what a cow looks like, but I couldn't create a vivid enough image in my mind to like know how to translate that onto paper.
So if you think cow, like, do you see a cow at all right now?
Kind of like a vague outline, maybe,
okay.
but like not detailed enough to like draw
Actually
it.
draw it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I like really think through things a lot, and I'm a very like verbal processor. So like kind of like what you're saying about your steps of how to get ready for something, like I can do that in my mind, but like something that I'm feeling very emotional about, it'll be that same kind of thing where I'm just kind of swirling around in my head, but once I'm talking to someone, then I can kind of like sort it out. But yeah, it's very like verbal oriented and like music as well, but very much like the lyrics of music. So like one song or like one word or phrase, if like I know a song that has that same thing, it'll just pop into my head, and usually I'll have to like sing it to get it out of my head. But yeah, it's very much like the word aspects of songs rather than hearing like the actual
like
music.
Melody or
yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I have very visual, like verbal in my head as well. I have just a monologue just going, which is distracting because sometimes I'll be hearing that while someone else is talking, part of that ADHD fun, like having to have two conversations at the same time. Right. But also I see a lot of pictures. Like if I'm reading a book, it's a full film. I was talking to my friend who they were talking about how they have no pictures really or words, but just concepts. And they likened it to when they're having anxiety or overwhelm, it's just a tornado, like of just like, which is really fascinating.
I think that's like a really important and interesting question to ask, because like the more that we can talk to other people about those types of experiences, it just helps us understand so much more that there are other ways of experiencing the world. And I think it's just something people can take for granted because you can't like see into someone's head, right?
Yes.
You can see their behaviors, but like you said, like the behavior, you could have the same behavior from different people for many different reasons. And so if you can understand why it's manifesting in that way, or like that this is how they process things, and that really can help you like meet people where they're at and understand themselves and yourself better.
Yeah. And like that friend was telling me, because they have trouble when there's like an argument or a disagreement or something, verbalizing in the moment, like advocating for themselves or even just like explaining their point of view, because they literally have to translate from this conceptual language of their mind into English words. And that was really fascinating to me, because I can have all the words in my head before they even come out. And I'll play conversations afterward or before, or, you know, all of those things. And so to think that there's a translation barrier between your thoughts and your like speaking is really fascinating. And they are very good at, even though they say they don't really see a lot of pictures, they're like the engineering type of mind, very DIY. They've built most of the things in my house, which to me would feel impossible. And so like that sort of just the different strengths that people have, partially because of how their thoughts are. Yeah, it's just very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that different strengths part is so important, because like one of the things that I was reflecting on coming into this interview was like my experience with my autistic sibling, and this idea of like growing up as his older sibling, I was like, why don't you just get these things? Like, you're so smart. Like, you love puzzles. He's always making mazes, coming to me with these like different math problems, trying to get me to solve them, which I couldn't. And I was like, I was pretty good at math. And I was like, you're just like insanely smart. But like, I've told you over and over and over that bugs me and you keep doing it. Like, why don't you get it? Why don't you understand that you're like speaking in this like rude tone of voice? Like, we've told you, you should learn. Right? And it wasn't until someone explained like multiple intelligences, his brain is wired different, it processes things differently, and having that understanding that like, okay, so those are like separate things. Like, he can be really good at puzzles, really good at math, really smart in these ways that like we like to define smart, but that doesn't mean that just because I've told you the same thing over and over that you're gonna be able to translate that into that like social intelligence or that body awareness or that impulse control, you know, all those different things.
Yes. And that's a huge thing that I try to, like, I work with couples a lot. I do like what I call a translation. So between a neurotypical partner and a neurodivergent partner, or what happens a lot is an autistic partner and ADHD partner, which is really fun. And trying to help them learn to sort of communicate like why they're doing things and what the struggle is. And then the person can support them in a way that actually helps, because if you've told somebody 30 times, don't do that, and they keep doing it, clearly the problem is not that they don't know, right? Like there's like either a need is not being met for them and this is the only way, or there's a skill that needs to be built, right? And so like I try to take people from like reward and punishment into needs and skills, and that is huge for parents who are so frustrated. They're like, you're so smart, you're so capable, why can't you do this thing? And then the parent is having a hard time too, and you got to feel for them because they don't know. And the kid just feels like, what's wrong with me? Like, I don't know. Like, and everybody's frustrated, and all you have to do is just go, wait, so why are you having trouble cleaning your room? Do you know that you should be cleaning your room? Yes. Do you care? Yes. Like, I really care.
Or what does that even mean to you to like clean your room?
Right.
Like,
totally.
I have a friend who's like, I just don't even see mess. My partner's always like, you're leaving the living room so messy. And he's like, walks in and he's like, looks fine to me. Like, I don't see the keys on the couch or like the mail on the table. Like, it just looks like the living room to me.
Yes, absolutely.
So like breaking that down into those steps, or creating, like you said, that very clear expectation of this is what it needs to look like.
Yes.
I mean, that was something that my brother brought up to me as a big reason why he didn't do well in high school, even though he was like so incredibly smart, like can learn the things that he's trying to learn, but he can't create the products that they're expecting to make. One of those was not having the clear expectation. And so instead of like me, I'd be like, well, I'll just get started and then I'll get feedback along the way and adjust. To him, it was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing and I'm going to do it wrong, and then all my time and energy will be wasted, so I'm just not going to do it at all. And then, you know, once you have the clear expectation, then breaking down the steps from there and like why it's important. The nitty-gritty of like why that's being asked to do. And I think that's a good thing for teachers too, because if you're having to think about why you're asking someone to do what they're doing and you realize
there's no
point, why, you know, maybe you don't need to ask them to do that.
Yes, I had a client come to me and he was a student and he was trying to, you know, be better at one of his goals that he set. He was like, I want to journal every day, but I'm having a hard time getting started. And I was like, okay, so we're trying all these different things. Like, let's try journaling with a friend. Let's try journaling at a cafe, so it's a different environment. Let's try doing just a little bit at a time. And it just like nothing was really successful in getting him to journal. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't really working, but let's just take what is the need that the journal is fulfilling, and we can find something else to meet that need. So like if you just need to get out your feelings, maybe we're going to record it. If you need to keep track of something, like maybe there's an app or, you know, something like that. Let's meet the need in a different way. And he goes, I don't know why I need to journal. And I was like, are you like, you know, like do you need to keep track of things? Are you trying to get your feelings out? He's like, no, I don't need any of those things. And I was like, why are you journaling then? And he was just like, well, people keep saying it's a good thing to do. Yeah. I'm just like, no.
I think it's a good question for anyone to ask, like even neurotypical people. And I think there's a lot of things that we do because that's like what everyone says that you should do. But like look at why you feel like you need to do that, or why people are saying that you should do that. And it might let a lot of stress off of your shoulders.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So tell me what school was like for you growing up.
I did fairly well in school, and I really loved to learn. So in that sense, I really enjoyed it. I think once I got to that like age around like 3rd to 5th grade where like the social game became a big part of it, it was like I didn't have like nice new clothes, and so I was like very aware of like who the popular people were, and that I wasn't necessarily part of them, but I was able to make friends, and so I did have a group of friends. I didn't feel too isolated. I think like a lot of people do have that awareness of like, oh, am I fitting in? Am I not fitting in? Once I got into high school, there were things that like I got really overwhelmed with different things going in my personal life. I dealt with some depression, and that also contributed to that overwhelm. There's just like so many more big projects, so that like learning that like time management part of it, like that was kind of a struggle. But I was thinking about what you said about those rewards, punishments. Like at a certain point my dad was like, okay, well, I'm going to be paying you for grades because you need some sort of motivation to do this. And that actually worked for me in that moment. I needed some reason to kind of find a way to move past that. And I was started to get involved in theater as well. So I had like something that I was like really passionate about and interested in. So I was able to like get out of that depression somewhat, finding people that really got me, and that like I didn't care anymore about like who the popular people were. I had my people and we had a lot of fun. So that was great. So, all in all, it was a good experience for me. I enjoyed it. There were just those struggles with insecurity and growing up. But like contrasted that with both of my siblings' experience, also both like very smart, able to like catch on to the concepts and things, but both of them really struggled going like throughout high school, whereas like I got to this point where I was able to kind of like make some changes and get through everything really well. Their needs weren't met, and they both like really struggled at the end of high school. So like for my youngest sibling, it was like undiagnosed mental health struggles and not understanding why they were asked to do the things that they needed to do and not being able to find that motivation, whereas I was able to find that motivation. And or even if there was like, I'm paying you for your grades type of thing, like that wasn't enough to overcome like the obstacles that they were facing because they didn't have the supports in place to like meet what they needed. And same with my brother, like he ended up getting his GED and then went on to college, and college was a much more successful experience for him because it was like longer classes once a week. He didn't have like so many different little things to like keep track of. It was in his element. He was like doing computer programming, so he didn't have a lot of the like busy work and like tedious assignments that didn't really seem to make any sense. So it's been interesting from that perspective to like contrast our school experiences because, yeah, I feel like we kind of had a same starting off point, but like throughout our experiences in school, I was able to kind of navigate things a little bit more easily where they just kept getting kind of, I want to say like pushed further and further. I don't know if I want to say behind, but like there were just more and more barriers in their way that piled up that no one was helping them navigate around or was really understanding like what it was that they were struggling with and trying to meet them there to help them succeed.
Yes, totally. And I noticed like a couple things that you said, like as far as finding something that you were passionate about, like having that theater there. A lot of parents will say, no extracurriculars until yours. And then as adults, we do that to ourselves. Like, well, I can't go hang out with my friends, or I can't do this art project, or I can't do this thing because I have to get these things done. But if you're so overwhelmed with those things, if you have no joy and passion in your life, like that's going to destroy your executive function. That's going to destroy like all of your motivation. And so it's so important to be adding those like passions into your life, even first, dessert first in some cases are. And the other thing is having that community. You found people who understood you. And like that's so much harder for a neurodivergent person, especially who doesn't recognize that they're neurodivergent, and then just being like, why am I so different? Why am I so weird? I ended up in high school, my best friend that I found, she's autistic ADHD, and she ended up dating this guy whose best friend was this guy who was neurodivergent and was going to a school specifically for neurodivergent people. So I started dating him, and then that I was 15, and then all of the people from his school, it's a very small school, became my best friends, and one of them's in my basement right now. And so I ended up making neurodivergent friends really early just by that connection, which made for me high school so much more bearable than middle school and elementary school were entirely unbearable. And even though I struggled with my executive functions, I was always in trouble with teachers for not turning in assignments. I was in trouble with my parents for having my room not clean, all of those things. But I still had a good sense of self and joy in my life and feelings of competence because I knew that I had this community. And for me, it was also like creative ventures like drawing and film stuff like this. And so like those things made it so that high school was tolerable. Whereas if my parents had said grades and your room need to be done and clean or whatever before, I would have been so miserable.
Like you really need those things. And I think for, neurotypical folks that might be able to do that thing where it's like no dessert until dinner, it still is damaging in a way to like deny yourself those things that bring you joy. Like I used to get so much anxiety over the weekends for not being productive. Like I I couldn't let myself relax and enjoy myself because I like had this idea in my mind, like you should be doing something, you should be achieving something, you should be accomplishing something. Recognizing where that came from, and like because I was able to meet those expectations and got rewarded for meeting those expectations, like I felt like that's okay, that's who I am. I'm a productive, like accomplished, successful person. So if I'm not doing something to work towards that, then I'm being a bad person.
Yes.
So it's important to examine that as well. One thing that came from the interviews in my thesis was someone I interviewed who got really into like horseback riding. So she was doing hippotherapy and then just got really involved in the barn and like really involved in taking care of the horses and found her community there. And she talked about how a lot of things that would be difficult or that she might not be able to like stick with it to build those skills, she is able to do in the context of the horse barn. So she's like able to develop a lot more patience and flexibility, whereas like in a school setting, it was too much and she would just shut down.
Yes.
So like she learned so many things that like if you were just like, well, you can't go to the horse barn because you stayed home from school today, she would be losing out on all those like skill building and learning opportunities because she's not in like her safe, comfortable, like happy place.
Yes.
Like belonging and acceptance is like that foundation to learning. So if you don't have that, you're not going to be learning. So why force yourself to be in a miserable place where you're not going to learn anyway?
Right. Okay, I'm curious about socializing. When you were younger, was it easy for you? You said that you had some trouble, obviously, like normal kind of growing pains, figuring out who you are and things like that. But in general, was it pretty easy for you to make friends? Like if you were in a room with new people, how would you navigate that?
Yeah, I think it was always fairly easy for me to make friends. Like I had a neighbor my same age and we had another friend our age. So we had like our core group of buddies that like we all grew up together, and actually just went on a walk with one of them yesterday. So like still friends. You know, I was definitely shy for a period of time. So I think if it was like a larger group or like if I felt intimidated, it might have been a little harder for me to open up. But I think in one-on-one settings, it was fairly easy for me to make friends. I had this realization like in college at like a party that, you know, I would have these judgments about people. I'm like, oh, they're not talking to me. They must like think that I'm not cool enough, or they might be judging me, or like maybe they're a snob. And then I thought, but I'm over here sitting here not talking to anyone, so maybe they're thinking that about me. So if I just like go talk to people, it's probably gonna be fine. And it has been, fortunately. So I think if I let that fear of judgment get in my way from like, you know, not being vulnerable and opening up to people, that makes it more difficult. But I think for the most part, asking questions about other people and then trying to find those like common interests, like I can fairly easily navigate that and make friends with people.
Yeah, I don't really struggle with that myself, really. But I know like so many people do, obviously, especially autistic people. So I did want to talk about that. And like, it's interesting to me, like that concept of feeling secure in yourself, making it easier for you to be able to go up. Because you know, working with you, like you have such a warm countenance, you're very inviting, you're very friendly, like it makes it really easy for people to, like, yeah, I can see that it would be very easy for you to make friends. And that does take like a certain amount of security. Like you're focused on how other people feel and not yourself, right? Yeah. Like if you're stuck in, are they gonna like me? Am I being an idiot? Am I dumb? It's all these like I, right? But if you're raised neurodivergent, and you don't have that sense of self, you don't know why you are the way you are, you don't know how you're supposed to be in the world, you don't really understand your identity, which especially when you're, you know, young, identity is so important.
I think that security of recognizing, like, there is this balance of like, okay, if someone's having a problem with me, how much of that is me and how much is them? And like, I think it is important to recognize like you can offend people and you can say things that might hurt them, even if you're not meaning to. But like, if that's because of something about who you are, like, then that's on them. Like, if they're gonna have a problem with that.
Yeah, right.
But I do think, like, that neurotypical ability perhaps of being able to read and respond to the very subtle signals really helps with that. I can say something and kind of notice, oh, like maybe there's like a little grimace on their face, so I'm gonna steer in the other direction and not do that again. Can help with those like ability to make friends. At the same time, it kind of can like lead to changing yourself to like please other people, which has been an issue that I've struggled with, and like that people pleasing thing. Yeah. It's not an easy answer, I don't think. Like it's very complex to like recognize the things about yourself that if someone has a problem with that, then being able to be like, well, that's fine, that's who I am, but not being like, well, I'm just gonna go around being a jerk face to everybody, and that's their problem.
Right, yeah. What's interesting to me is like that, like the stereotype of autism is like that they can't pick up on social cues, but so many, especially like AFAB autistics that I know have gone the other direction to where they are hyper vigilant about noticing every grimace or like the way that their shoulders are held. And so when they're in a social situation, they're telling me like, oh, I have to like, I'm looking and paying attention. And I'm like, that sounds so exhausting. Because to me, it feels like a very natural flow. I don't notice. I'm not thinking like Taylor's eyes are going over there. Maybe I'm boring now or like something like that. It's just sort of a natural like flow for me. And so I like thinking about how exhausting that would be. And so many people think, oh, I'm not autistic because I'm hyper empathetic, I'm hyper aware of social cues, and you're like, no, like you know, an holistic person doesn't need to, you know, do this amount of labor to like have a social interaction. I think that's really interesting. Yeah. So like when I mentioned that, it is very much more of just like a natural flow, something that like I don't like think about. It's just something I've noticed like I can, you know, naturally respond to. But yeah, there definitely is that myth that like one, like autistic people don't want friends, which is ridiculous, or like don't understand how other people are feeling. And what I've come to understand is like people can assume that because they might respond differently, going back to like that behavior thing. So just because an autistic person might not react or respond in the way that you expect them to someone displaying a certain emotion to, doesn't mean that they don't understand that or feel that. And sometimes it's like it's even so overwhelming to them because they feel it so intensely that they're going to respond differently. And they do really want that social connection, and it's just like, how do I do that in this moment with like... I appreciate that you brought up that point, because I think that's a huge issue, especially to like AFAB folks not getting that autism diagnosis or not being recognized that as autistic. And I've, you know, seen that firsthand of people being able to like mask so well that they don't, you know, even the people diagnosing them don't see it, but then they go home and they have a complete meltdown because they've been like holding it together all day and like really intellectualizing and picking apart each of these like little things that they notice and trying to present themselves the right way. Yeah, and I think that empathy thing is really interesting because it's seen from such a neurotypical lens that like, because we all, with this neurodiversity, we might not understand everyone else's experience. So I can say I've had trouble with neurotypicals having empathy for my executive dysfunction, my time management, because they don't understand. So then they have a lack of empathy. I, in the past, have definitely had a lack of empathy for some of my autistic friends, like rigidity, where I was like, oh my God, like you think you're right about everything. So I was lacking that empathy for them because I didn't understand their experience. And so I'm sure ADHDers and autistics are lacking empathy for neurotypicals at times because it's a different experience. For a good example is like small talk. An ADHDer, because we're so excited, might like just jump in, or an autistic person might think like, oh, what's the point of that? So I'm going to skip it. And then a neurotypical person is like, oh, you don't have any empathy for me. I'm asking you like how you're feeling. And then an autistic person's like, why are you asking me how I'm feeling? That's so overwhelming. Like, how rude of you to, that's so personal. So understanding neurodiversity can help us to be more empathetic to each other because understanding that we're all experiencing life in like such a different way. Totally. And like there's those neurotypical social scripts. How are you? And I expect you to say fine. But if you launch into this whole thing, well, like my dog's not feeling well and I didn't sleep at all last night. And then the neurotypical person might be like, wow, they're so self-absorbed. They're just talking about themselves. It's really interesting. I find it so hypocritical. People being like, oh, we can't like let them just script. Like that's not real communication. But then there's just
those like all those neurotypical social scripts that we use all the time that we take for granted, just because it doesn't fit in your way of moving in the world.
Yes.
It's still communication as much as like everyone else does on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. So my last question was going to be about how you can understand neurodivergent people better, but I think we've really covered that a lot. But would you maybe have any advice for someone who has maybe a neurodivergent child or partner or friend that they're trying to understand better? How do you, as a neurotypical person, how do you understand and create empathy for those people?
This kind of ties into like why I decided to major in psychology, because growing up in my family with my neurodivergent siblings and their experiences, and then also like wanting to get to know myself better, where it's just like been asking why and like really delving into like the motivations behind thoughts and behaviors. It can be a difficult thing to do, especially if someone may not be as verbal or like might not have that like self-awareness or self-reflection. But I think for yourself, like continuing to ask why, maybe giving the benefit of the doubt, not just jumping to an assumption of how they might be thinking or feeling based on their behavior, but recognizing that there's like many different reasons why it might be coming out that way. Maybe like brainstorming different reasons why that could be happening the way that it is. And that most people want to do well, they want to connect with the people around them. And so if that's not happening, there's probably something else going on there. And so if you can ask yourself why you're thinking and feeling and experiencing what you are, and really be open to that being like many different possibilities, and then extending that courtesy to them as well. Thinking about that, and as much as possible, like talking to them about that. Hey, I noticed like you're doing this thing, and I was just wondering what's going on for you around that so I can understand you better.
Yeah. That's great advice. Please like and subscribe and follow me on TikTok or Instagram, ADHD Coach Sheila. You can also go to my website, sheilahenson.com, for classes, coaching groups, one-on-one coaching, and some of that like couples translation or parent to teen translation if you do need help understanding your neurotypical or neurodivergent family member, spouse, whatever. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please comment below about how your experiences are different or the same than mine or Taylor's. Please like and subscribe. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram at ADHD Coach Sheila, and you can sign up for any of my classes, groups, or coaching at sheilahenson.com on my events page.